Hey kids, this is Miss Morrison. Let's see here. This is for 1.5 notes, solving quadratics. And quadratics are equations that have this little x squared sucker. Yeah. And quadratics, also, when you graph them, they look like you. Yeah, okay. And then back in 1.2, section 1.2, we learned how to solve for linear, which is just an x, or we learned how to solve for fractions with the x, and those were called rationals. So now we're trying to solve for the letter x squared, and there's a couple of different ways we can solve. There's factoring, quadratic formula, or the square root property. Each type or each method is used for a specific time, but overall, in general, you can do quadratic formula for anything and everything. Factoring, unfortunately, it has to be factorable, and the square root property, it has to look a certain way. So on your homework, it will say square root property, quadratic, factoring. And so that's how you know what to do. But in general, after this section, we'll probably just use the quadratic formula most of the time, and then every once in a while do the square root, and every once in a while do the factoring. So anyway, the square root property, the how-to steps say you do SA, DM, like sad, and then once you get to the E exponent, instead of raising both sides, can you cross that out and put house both sides? And then the house and the tiny 2 cankle, and then you do what's left over from the parentheses, and you finish with listing your answers with commas in between. So let's do this example. It says 2x squared equals 32, and we're going to solve using the square root property. Well, first, I see if there's any subtraction or addition, and there ain't. So next, it's time to DM. DM means divide or multiply. So right now, this big fat 2 is multiplying, and to get rid of multiply, we divide. And when we divide, we get x squared equals 16. Woohoo! Now let's look at the E exponent. To get rid of the E exponent, that's where step 3 comes in, where you square root both sides. So you put a house on both sides. Then step 4 comes in, where it says the house and the tiny 2 cankle. So those cankle. And all you have is that good old boy x equals, and then whatever the square root of 16 is. And the square root of 16 is plus and minus 4. And if you're wondering where the heck that came from, it's because 4 times 4, or 4 squared, is 16. And also, negative 4 squared, or negative 4 times negative 4, is 16. So this question is asking for what could I put where this letter is so that when I square it, I get a 16. Well, you could put 2 different things, a 4 or a negative 4. Okay? And your homework, it probably doesn't do this little plus minus. I don't know if it counts it right. So list it as 4 comma negative 4. Okay, and you might be wondering, why the heck am I putting a plus minus here? But in the last section with square roots, we did not put a plus minus. Like, see over here, this square root of negative 64. It was in section 1.4. We did not put a plus minus on this because it didn't say the magic S word, solve. It said simplify. For us, anytime it says the word solve and you use a square root, then your answer is always going to have a plus minus. or there's going to be two types of answers, and you get them from a plus minus that comes from the square root. Okay, let's do another one. How about we got 3 parentheses x plus 1 close parentheses squared plus 7 equals, oh gatos, should have thought about this. 12. Let's try 19. Whoa. Okay, and we're gonna solve. So again, I'm gonna throw up that sad map. Okay, and first we look for subtraction, addition. I know this plus 1 looks like the addition part, but it's in the P parentheses. So we don't do it till the very last. Darn. So instead, let's find the subtract addition that we do have. It looks like I have a plus 1. So we're going to move the 7 over, and when we subtract the 7, I think we get 12. Okay, then again, we're not getting rid of that plus 1 because it's in the P parentheses. So let's see what's next. Next is DM. So this, let's see what we can DM. This 3 is multiplying because it's a pretend dot. So we divide by 3. And we get x plus 1, close parentheses squared, equals a quattro. Woohoo. And you don't divide the 3 into the 1 because that's in parentheses. So the whole purpose of dividing that 3 is to cancel. Okay, so now we're on E, exponent. E exponent means you put a house on both sides. Okay, and the house and the tiny 2 cancel. And you just get x plus 1. And the parentheses go away. Or you could go ahead and write them down again. It doesn't really matter. Equals, the square root of 4 is 2 and negative 2. Because remember, anytime we solve and we're using a square root, it pops out a plus minus. And you can either put it as plus minus, you could put it with a comma in between, or you could even write the word and. I'm desperate. Okay, lastly is take care of what was in the parentheses. So what was in the parentheses was a minus 1. So I'm going to minus 1 there. And then over here, I have to minus 1 from both. And that's kind of odd looking, but I'm desperate. I'm just trying to get you to understand. So here, 2 minus 1 is 1. And negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. Hey baby, we solved. Okay, the next thing that we're going to go over is how to solve by factoring. And it's going to be an easy factoring. Solve by factoring. Okay, and let's say we have x squared minus 4x plus 5 equals 0. Well, first, let's look at our flow chart. So we're no longer doing square root property. Now we're factoring. It says factor using the flow chart. Oh, hello, baby. Here's my flow chart. So in 1.2, we already learned how to do the GCF, and we learned how to do a binomial, difference of 2 squares, like this x squared minus 25 turns into same thing with pluses and minuses. X is at the front, and the square root of 25 is 5, so 5's at the back. So you already learned GCF and binomial. Now it's time to learn a trinomial, which is a 3-nomial. And there's 2 different types. There's where a equals 1, like if you look at this example, I have a pretend 1 on that x squared. Or there's where a is not 1, like on this example I have a 6 on the x squared. Let's do the one where a is 1. First, oh, and look, it's the same example from over here. Okay, so first we're going to write down that we have to add to the number on the b. And the number on the b, or the number for the b, is whatever's on your x. Not your x squared, your x. So here on my x is negative 4. And I think there's a typo here, so change this plus 5 to minus 5. Sorry. Okay. Then you're going to write down multiply to the number for the C, and the C is the naked number. So for us, that -5, because it was a typo. The next step is to figure out what multiplies to -5. So there's definitely a -5 and a +1, and there's definitely a +5 and a -1. This is a slightly different factor tree from 1.4. It's not actually a factor tree, it's just a little arrow. Okay, and then now we're going to find the numbers that satisfy the plus and the multiply. So these sets definitely multiply to -5, but if I add them, what do I get? Well, -5 plus 1 right here is -4. And then this next sucker, 5 plus a -1 equals a 4. Hola, this is Morrison. Yes, ma'am. Is it not from... Okay, yeah. Yes, can I bring it back at the end of the day, or you want me... I'm sorry, what'd you say? Oh, okay, tell her I'm in 210. Okay, thank you, bye. My bad. Okay, so anyway, if I add these two sets, I get a -4 and a 4, but let's look. I wanted to add to a -4, so I'm going to use this pair, the -5 and the +1. So that's what step 4 means. It means we have to find the pair that both multiplies to -5 and adds to -4. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill in the blanks. I'm going to draw 2 sets of parentheses, an X, 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 X. And then that pair of numbers I chose, not the -4, but the -5 and the +1. Hey, baby, we just factored. Okay, so now let's go back to our actual problem and look at the how-to steps. We were supposed to solve by factoring, and it said, step 1, factor using the flow chart. Well, we did. We got, oh, and this was supposed to be a minus sign. There was a typo. And we got parentheses x -5, parentheses x + 1. Second step says equal each little chunk to 0. So I'm going to say x -5 equals 0 and x + 1 equals 0. Okay. Third step says solve for x. So we're going to get x by itself. So the opposite of this -5 is +5. The opposite of this -1, or this +1, is -1. So we get x equals a +5 and a -1. Woohoo! Done with that problem.